Chapter 12, Cry of the Hunters, Lord of the Flies. Ralph lay in a covert, wondering about his wounds. The bruised flesh was inches in diameter over his right ribs, with a swollen and bloody scar where the spear had hit him. His hair was full of dirt and tapped like the tendrils of a creeper. All over he was scratched and bruised from his flight through the forest. By the time his breathing was normal again, he had worked out that bathing these injuries would have to wait. How could you listen for naked feet if you were splashing in the water? How could you be safe by the little stream or in the open beach? Ralph listened. He was not really far from the castle rock, and during the first panic he had thought he heard sounds of pursuit. But the hunters had only sneaked into the fringes of the greenery, retrieving spears perhaps, and then had rushed back to the sunny rock as if terrified of the darkness under the leaves. He had even glimpsed one of them, stripped down, black and red, and had judged that it was Bill. But really, thought Ralph, that was not Bill. This was a savage whose image refused to blend with the ancient picture of a boy in shorts and a shirt. The afternoon died away. The circular spots of sunlight moved steadily over green fronds and brown fiber, but no sound came from behind the rock. At last, Ralph wormed out of the ferns and sneaked through the edge of that impenetrable thicket that fronted the neck of the land. He peered with elaborate caution between branches at the edge, and he could see Robert sitting on guard at the top of the cliff. He held a spear in his left hand, and he was tossing up a pebble and catching it again with his right. Behind him, a column of smoke rose thickly, so that Ralph's nostrils flared and his mouth dribbled. He wiped his nose and mouth with the back of his hand, and for the first time since the morning he felt hungry. The tribe must be sitting around the gutted pig, watching the fat ooze and burn among the ashes. They would be intent. Another figure, an unrecognizable one, appeared by Robert and gave him something, and then turned and went back to the rock. Robert laid his spear on the rock beside him and began to gnaw between his raised hands, so the feast was beginning and the watchman had been given his portion. Ralph saw that for the first time being he was safe. He limped away through the fruit trees, drawn by the thought of the poor food, yet bitter when he remembered the feast. Feast today and then tomorrow. What do you think they're going to do tomorrow? Hunt. Who?
Ralph.
He argued unconvincingly that they would let him alone, perhaps even make an outlaw out of him. But then the fatal unreasoning knowledge that came to him again, the breaking of the conch, the deaths of Piggy and Simon lay over the island like a vapor. These painted savages would go further and further. Then there was the indefinable connection between himself and Jack, who therefore would never let him alone. Never. He paused, sun-flecked, holding up a bough, prepared to duck under it. A spasm of terror set him shaking, and he cried aloud, "No, they're not as bad as that. It was an accident." He ducked under the bough, run clumsily, and then stopped, and he listened. He came to the smashed acres of fruit, and he ate greedily. He saw two little ones, and not having any idea of his own appearance, he wondered why they screamed and ran. When he had eaten, he went toward the beach. The sunlight was slanting now into the palms by the wrecked shelter. There was the platform and the pool. The best thing to do was to ignore this leaden feeling about his heart and rely on their common sense, their daylight sanity. Now that the tribe had eaten, the thing to do was to try again. And anyway, he couldn't stay here all night in an empty shelter by a deserted platform. His flesh crept and he shivered in the evening sun. No fire, no smoke, no rescue. He turned and limped away through the forest toward Jack's end of the island. The slanting sticks of sunlight were lost among the branches. At length he came to a clearing in the forest where rock prevented vegetation from growing. Now it was a pool of shadows, and Ralph nearly flung himself behind a tree when he saw something standing in the center. But then he saw that the white face was bone, and that the pig's skull grinned at him from on top of the stick. He walked slowly into the middle of the clearing, and looking steadily at the skull that gleamed as white as ever the conch had done, and seemed to jeer at him cynically. An inquisitive ant was busy in one of the eye sockets, but otherwise the thing was lifeless. Or was it? Little prickles of sensation ran up and down his back. He stood, the skull about eye level with his face, and held up his hair with two hands. The teeth grinned. The empty socket seemed to hold his gaze masterfully and without effort. What was it? The skull regarded Ralph like one who knows all the answers and won't tell. A sick fear and rage swept him. Fiercely he hit out the filthy thing in front of him that bobbed like a toy and came back, still grinning into his face, so that he lashed out and cried out in loathing. And then he was licking his bruised knuckles and looking at the bare stick while the skull lay in two pieces, its grin now 6 feet across. He wrenched the quavering stick from the crack and held it as a spear between him and the white pieces, and then he backed away, keeping his face to the skull that lay grinning in the sky. When the green glow had gone from the horizon and the night was fully accomplished, Ralph came again to the thicket in front of the castle rock. Peeping through, he could see that the height was still occupied, and whoever it was up there had a spear at the ready. He knelt among the shadows and felt his isolation bitterly. They were savages, it was true, but they were human, and the ambushing fears of the deep night were coming on. Ralph moaned faintly. Tired though he was, he could not relax and fall into a well of sleep for fear of the tribe. Might it not be possible to walk boldly into the fort, say, "I've got packs," laugh lightly, and sleep among the others? Pretend they were still boys, schoolboys, who had said, "Sir, yes, sir," and worn caps. Daylight might have been an answered yes, but darkness and the horrors of death said no. Lying there in the darkness, he knew he was an outcast, because I had some sense. He rubbed his cheek along his forearms, smelling the acrid scent of salt and sweat and the staleness of dirt. Over to the left, the waves of ocean were breathing, sucking down, and then boiling back over the rock. There were sounds coming from behind the castle rock. Listening carefully, detached his mind from the swing of the sea, Ralph could make out a familiar rhythm. Kill the beast, cut his throat, spill his blood. The tribe was dancing. Somewhere on the other side of this rock, there would be a dark circle, a glowing fire, and meat. They would be savoring food in the comfort of safety. A noise near at hand made him quiver. Savages were clambering up over the castle rock, right up to the top, and he could hear voices. He sneaked forward a few yards and saw the shape at the top of the rock change and enlarge. There were only 2 boys on the island who moved and talked like that. Ralph put his head down on his forearms and accepted the new fact like a wound. Sam and Eric were part of the tribe now. They were guarding the castle rock against him. There was no chance of rescuing them and building up an outlaw tribe on the other end of the island. Sam and Eric were savages like the rest. Piggy was dead, and the conch smashed to powder. At length, the guard climbed down. The 2 that remained seemed nothing more than a dark extension of the rock. A star appeared behind them, and they were momentarily eclipsed by some movement. Ralph edged forward, feeling his way over the uneven surface as though he were blind. There were miles of vague water at his right, and the restless ocean lay under his left hand, as awful as the shaft of a pit. Every minute the water breathed around the death rock and flowered into a field of whiteness. Ralph crawled until he found the edge of the entry in his grasp. The lookouts were immediately above him, and he could see the end of a spear projecting over the rock. He called very gently, "Sam and Eric." There was no reply. To carry, he must speak louder, and this would rouse those striped and inimical creatures from their feasting by the fire. He set his teeth and started to climb, finding the folds by touch. The stick that had supported his skull hampered him, but he would not be parted from his only weapon. He was nearly level with the twins before he spoke again. "Sam and Eric." He heard a cry and a flurry from the rock. The twins had grabbed each other and were gibbering. "It's me, Ralph." Terrified that they would run and give the alarm, he hauled himself up until his head and his shoulders stuck over the top. Far below his armpit, he saw the luminous flowering around the rock. "It's only me, Ralph." At length, they bent forward and peered in his face. We didn't know what it was. We thought." Memory of their new and shameful loyalty came to them. Eric was silent, but Sam tried to do his duty. "You gotta go, Ralph. You gotta go away now." He wagged his spear and essayed his fierceness. "You shove off, see?" Eric nodded agreement and jabbed his spear into the air. Ralph leaned on his arms and did not go. "I came to see you 2. His voice was thick. His throat was hurting him now, though he had received no wound. "I came to see you 2. Words could not express the dull pain of these things. He fell silent, while the vivid stars were split and danced all ways. Sam shifted uneasily. "Honest, Ralph, you'd better go." Ralph looked up again. "You 2 aren't painted. How can you? If it were light, shame would burn them in admitting these things. But the night was dark." Eric took up, and then the twins started their antiphonal speech. "You got to go because it's not safe. They hurt us."